Hi, everybody.
Hi.
So the second part of the Struggle in Silence of Beethoven. Basically, we're going through the meat of his late period in this show through various movements. And I wanted to kick off by reading a passage of Swafford about the Opus 110 sonata. So here we go. He continued to think of himself not just as a composer, but as a tone poet. The late sonatas and quartets are the distilled essence of his poetic style, when the larger narrative and larger formal patterns are covered over by an intimate involvement with the moment, shifting ideas and shifting emotions, approaching at times the effective stream of consciousness. In the first movement, after the parade of some 6 distinct ideas in the course of a minute, he's speaking of the Opus 110, suddenly, without a repeat, we begin a short development. It gives way almost undetectably to the recapitulation, which is transformed in its own development, its diaphanous arpeggios wafting over the whole of the keyboard. From the tender lyricism to farce, for the second movement, a rambunctious 2-beat scherzo based on 2 German folk songs. First, My Cat Has Had Some Kittens. Second, and more intriguing, I'm a Slob, You're a Slob. Another instant change of mood, a slow movement on the order of an operatic recitative in arioso, the beginning indescribably sorrowful, then a long arched arioso in A-flat major in 12/16 time. Here is music rising from Beethoven's own sorrow to become universal, what the Romantics called Weltschmerz, world pain. It sinks to a whisper and a pianissimo pause. So I alluded to the fact that Beethoven uses some songs from Viennese beer halls, and this is what Swafford is speaking to. This one song, I'm a Slob, you're a Slob, which is the second theme of the scherzo of the second movement. It's quite something. But I spoke a little bit about the third movement, which we will listen to next week. But I wanted to take a look at it this evening, as it's the connective tissue from that scherzo of beer songs to the long fugue of the last movement, which we will hear next week. But I wanted to take a look at the score of the third movement. So here we go. And the first thing we notice in Beethoven, in late Beethoven, when again he's getting away from the harpsichord and thinking about temperament in the forte piano, we've got 4 flats here. So right in B flat, 5 flats, sorry, B flat and B flat minor. So he's using keys that are not normally used, that weren't normally used before him. And then he touches a little bit of C flat major here, and we'll get otherwise known as another key, which we'll get into here. And then he's G flat major, E flat major, and then this big long recitative here, this movement, this measure. And then look what he does here. He has a C flat dominant 7, which then converts to a B dominant 7. Musicians, what's he doing there?
Oh, wow, that's unusual. The heck is that?
Yeah.
What note is the same as C flat?
No idea.
A half step below C.
B.
B. So all he's doing here, this is the same chord as this chord. He's just spelling it differently. So you have a C flat dominant 7, which plays like a B dominant 7, and then he just flips the switch and goes B dominant 7 here. But it's really the same chord, only spelled out differently. Okay, and then he goes for a bar, and he hits on the 7th of the chord, the A, and then pivots to E major, 4 sharps. But he doesn't land you in E major until he's finished hammering away at the A's and then descending down here to its resolution. And then immediately he goes now into 6 flats and gives you a D diminished 7 chord and six flats for all of you musicians is G flat major or E flat minor. So he gives you the six flats, he gives you a diminished seventh chord, and then is he starting in E flat minor? He gives you the A and the E, then hits E, and then the chord spreads, and then he lands to where he's getting an A flat minor. So again, Beethoven moving chromatically and fooling your ear, even putting in the key signature of implying a key that's going to happen, but then he's lands solidly in A flat major for the Dankgesang, the plaintive song here of the Arioso. And this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful little melody that he goes and just ends very quietly. It doesn't last very long, this movement, maybe 2 minutes. But, you know, slows down here and then goes to pianissimo, pianissimo, and then I cut it off, but the fugue, it goes right into the fugue of the last movement. It's a wonderful little movement. And I wanted to listen to it with you while we look at the score. So let's play that. I'm gonna stop this share here because I need to share the audio as well. But let's listen to that transition. Major. Major. Recitative. See, sounds the same, right? Here we go. A flat minor. So again, we've seen that before where Beethoven for a while, sometimes in the beginning of a piece will be a little bit amorphous with the key. And then when he finally arrives at that arioso, it's a little bit more stable. It's still minor and sad, but it's stable in its harmonic structure, and gets you settled in for that beautiful arioso. What do we think about Paul's playing of Opus 110? Everyone's muted.
Incredible piece and incredible playing.
It really sets the tone. It sets the tone right from the get-go, where it's just a little bit amorphous, and then this sort of painful song that's being sung, and quietude that gets us into the fugue. If we remember what preceded this movement, you have that very stormy scherzo, dee da 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 ba ba ba, be da 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 ba ba ba. So it provides the contrast. It's the connective tissue between that raucous scherzo and the final fugue that happens, that we'll listen to next week. Any other thoughts about Opus 110? I mean, we could spend 5 shows and more on Opus 110 alone, but any other thoughts about it? Okay, well, let's go on to Opus 127. The Opus 127 is, and we've talked about it before when we looked at the theme and variation movement, which was the massive movement. It's the most straightforward of the last sonata, of the last late quartets, and he goes back to a sort of classical style, a structure, 4 movements, very straightforward. There's not this multi-movement structure. There's not attacca movements. It's a very structured piece. And we heard that the last movement with the Brentano Quartet, which was again a wonderful performance. But I have a quote from Maynard Solomon from his Beethoven book, talking about the Opus 127 quartet, which is the first of the final quartets. The Opus 127 is the first work of the final quartets. Maynard Solomon says, "This quartet can be seen as a natural outgrowth of the last piano sonatas, though it reflects a commitment to classical structure that the sonatas were tending to disavow. Opus 127 minimizes contrast. Despite its unenigmatic approachability and lyricism, the quartet is not without late-style characteristics. The driving dotted rhythms of the scherzo, the contrapuntal textures, the fantastic, idealized, occasionally violent dance rhythms of the pastoral finale, which we listened to, and especially the luxuriously ornamental variations of the adagio, in the course of which the theme itself is transformed into a new entity." This quartet is perhaps the least performed of the late quartets, and many listeners, it's perhaps the least recognizable to listeners. Would you agree with that statement? I mean, we tend to listen to Opus 130, Opus 131, Opus 132, and 135, I think a lot more than this particular piece. And maybe it's because of the classical structure. Maybe it's that it's straightforward enough, but it's a really stunning quartet, especially I harken back to the theme and variations that we listened to a couple weeks ago. It's a really, really marvelous piece. Any thoughts about 127 and about this performance in particular? We not so much.
It was
William.
from 2007. No.
No, that was the Brentano.
The Brentano. Yeah.
Brentano was from 10 years ago, 2010.
Okay.
2010.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's they had done, that was actually an all Beethoven program, and we featured that particular program on the show, I believe on every single piece that they played on this program.
Yeah.
It's Opus 59 number 3 and yikes, 18 number 1, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, the Brentanos, I speak often about their exquisite sort of musicianship that they bring to everything. And they tend, I like in their programming, they tend to do the less heard pieces.
Yeah.
This program has an exception where it's all Beethoven, of course, but when they choose a Haydn quartet, a lot of times they'll pick something from Opus 64 or Opus 33, which aren't played as often as let's say Opus 76 or 77. And I like that they do that. They really highlight these sort of overlooked masterworks by these classical composers. So it's really
And it
wonderful.
keeps it, do they like to do it just to keep themselves challenged or keep things fresh?
I think with them, I don't think they're ever concerned about keeping things fresh, because I think they're so focused on being fresh and in the moment. I think that's a hallmark of their playing. It's never, I find in their performances that they are firmly committed to every single note they play. I've never heard them mail in a performance, even under the worst conditions. There was a funny story. I forget which season it was, but a couple seasons ago, 3 of them drove up in one car, and the cellist drove up by herself. And let's say she's directionally challenged, and she didn't show up for a while, and it turns out she was on Route 17 heading toward Binghamton, and showed up. I think she showed up maybe 45 minutes before the concert, in quite a state. And she was a bit frazzled in the and everything, but nobody in the audience could tell.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, and that's kind of how they roll. I mean, that's
Yeah.
just how they roll.
She was the one who did one of the features on Saturday, right?
Yes.
Vignettes. Yeah, nice.
Yeah, she's Nina she's an incredible cellist and a beautiful soul, and she's just lovely. They did this program at the 92nd Street Y about 5 years ago with dance, and they did the Bach Art of Fugue, and they had a dancer and a video projection behind them, and it was quite interesting. But their playing of the Art of Fugue, which is of course these spare contrapuntal pieces, were so immaculately performed. They were just beautiful, and her bass line was just so exquisite. And I there was a reception afterwards, and I just was so effusive to her about how she laid out that bass line and a lot of these things. She's really, really one of the great quartet cellists out there, actually.
Yeah, wonderful to hear a piece like that, like it's new.
Yeah, absolutely.
Was it a figured bass line? Was it written or was it figured?
No, it was. I'm using the term very loosely. I mean, it's the bass voice is what I'm speaking to.
Yeah.
And what I had appreciated most about it, and I appreciate them for this especially, is I'm a brass player, and wind and brass players were obsessed with articulation and lengths of notes and things. And every note was just spaced and had enough buoyancy and space. It was so impeccable. It was just it was so tasteful. Yeah. It's very, very special. Very special. I had to throw in the bagatelles because they're just so odd. I mean, they're just in Beethoven's late period. Paul brought them, that performance was 2017. And they're most famous because they're the last piano works that Beethoven wrote, the Opus 126 bagatelles, 6 bagatelles. And he meant these bagatelles as a set, that they're cyclic as an entity, as opposed to the earlier set of bagatelles, Opus 119, which are sort of a mishmash of short pieces that didn't tie together. They sort of differ by characteristic. But I thought it was interesting, the funny story that he owed some money, and that's how he had to, he wrote these these little pieces to pay off a debt to his, I think his brother. Yeah, his brother. So very, very wonderful. But I wanted to play some of the Opus 119 because they are never done. They're absolutely never done. And of course, Paul has done them. So I found a video of Paul playing from Wigmore Hall of the first bagatelle. It's only, what, I think 2 minutes long. So let's give a listen to the first bagatelle of Opus 119. This is Paul Lewis at Wigmore Hall. Just a beautiful, beautiful little song. Beautiful little songs, bagatelle. And it's hard. Like, I wanted to find a couple of them to show that they had been different, but they ain't out there. Somebody had bootlegged a performance of Grigory Sokolov with no video that I was going to use, but I didn't want to do that. But
Yeah.
What a charming little piece.
Yeah, and he played it so expressively. It's a simple thing, but he poured a lot into it.
Yeah, it was all there. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is why Paul comes up so much. You know, this is Paul, and I'm so grateful for him joining us on Saturday. I mean, Paul is truly one of the great pianists in the world. You know, he's such an incredible musician. And just like the Breton, like he pours everything out into everything, even these little ditties, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Really, really, but charming. You know, there's nothing very complicated about these bagatelles at all with Beethoven. He keeps it very straightforward. Almost like he's catering again to the amateur musician, which he stopped doing in his sonata writing. So
yeah.
And then we move to the big one, the Heiliger Dankgesang. Here's Beethoven who thinks he's going to die from this ailment, and goes to the country for some fresh air and natural milk, and cuts out the drinking and cuts out the coffee, and he's healed. And he writes this piece of music, that's very pastoral. You can sense the country setting in Baden as he's recovering. And he writes it in the Lydian mode, which is, I believe, the only time he writes in modes. Does anybody know what modes are?
There's scales with different spacing of whole and half tones.
That is exactly right, Delaney. Yes. So our typical scale has a place where there are half steps and whole steps, and there's whole steps, half step, and it's organized like that. So when you organize it differently, it gets very, very different sounds. And the Lydian mode has 4 whole steps, a half step, 2 whole steps, and a half step, as opposed to our regular scale. Let me think about this. That's 2 whole steps, a half step, 3 whole steps, and a half step.
I think it might be easier. A jazz player would think of it as take a major scale, start on the 4th. That's Lydian.
Start on the 4th. That's exactly right.
And you
That's
get,
exactly right.
because I can't remember whole steps and half steps.
Yeah. So he goes back to this ancient way of writing. This has to do with the church writings in the Renaissance and beforehand, and uses that as a tonal center rather than traditional harmony. So it gives it quite a special sound to the piece. But I wanted to play after, you have this enormous movement in the middle of this 5 movement work. And I wanted to play the 2 movements that come after it, and see how he sort of closes out this piece. So I wanted to share some video of the Eben string quartet playing the 4th and 5th movements. And I want you to see if there's any, how would you describe the transition from the 4th to the 5th movement? Let's just put it that way. What is Beethoven doing to get us from the 4th to the 5th movement? And they connect, I should say. So here we go. Here is the Eben string quartet with the Opus 131 quartet, the 4th and 5th movements. Oh, let's get out of that. Sorry. No. There we go. Haha, here we are.
It was a subtle transition.
Subtle transition.
So, what device did Beethoven use to get from the fourth to the fifth movement?
I noticed something, but I can't remember.
Going from A major to A minor?
Not harmonically.
Oh, not harmonica.
Something that he did in the Opus 110 sonata, but in a more extensive way. Something that's used often in opera. Oh dear.
Oh, I forgot to study for the quiz.
Something that's used in opera.
Recitative?
Bingo.
Ah,
Bingo. You have the tremolo in the in the lower strings and the violin. Dee dum ba da dee da dum da 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 dee da da bum 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 bum. Tremolo. He gives recitative.
uh-huh.
Yes.
Clever
So
boy.
Does he call it that?
Interestingly enough, in the Opus 110 that we saw, which only lasted a bar, he labeled it recitative. In this case, he doesn't. But it is so obviously a recitative. Yeah, it's really wonderful. It's very dramatic. He shifts. That's how it's a device that he shifts from one mood to the next to get you into the last movement. It's very cool.
I don't know the piece very well, but I found it challenging. I need to hear it more. Brilliant playing, though. I just don't get the piece totally yet.
I find that this one is the trickiest of them all to get. The Heiliger Dankgesang, is the anchor in the middle. But I agree with you. I agree with you that this one's trickier. I mean, Opus 130 has the grosse Fuge, so I can't overlook that. But as the piece as a whole, I find that it is probably the most challenging one across the board throughout the piece to understand and listen to.
I look forward to finding out more,
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. It shows, Opus 131 shows up. The quartets tend to, when they're going late Beethoven these days, there's a lot of 130. A lot of them like to do the 130 with the grosse Fuge. So it's just getting the group geared toward 131, which is, again, this is missing out on the Beethoven quartet cycle last spring. When we could have. It's kind of a shame, and my intention was, I was warned not to, but I really wanted it to be an intensive study. It was very compact, hearing the 6 programs.
Yeah.
And I will get it together again. I assure you, I will do it again, because it's just too valuable a project to overlook. So it's not easy to put together.
Yeah, you're gonna have to wait another 250 years.
No, I hope not. I hope not. So, Any other thoughts about tonight? Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming out again.
I learned
Thanks,
a
Derek.
lot. I learned a lot. Thank you.
Thanks for coming. And next week, I cheekily called the show The Art of Fugue. And we will be listening to fugues of Beethoven and late Beethoven. So we'll see you next week.
Okay.
Take care, everybody.
Relax, Eric.
Thank you.
I have a to learn about
Ryan.
this.
Thanks for coming.
Bye.
Bye.
Always enjoyable.